Hello, and welcome to You Want to Do What? Non-traditional pathways into game development as part of the Game Career Seminar at GDC. So for today's session, we'll each be talking about our paths into the games industry, and then we'll have a panel about what we learned on our journeys, where things have overlapped for us, and what has helped and what hasn't helped. So we're very excited you can join us. And before we dive in, here are our panelists for today. We'll each do our own introductions as part of our individual talks. So let's start those now with Erica.
All right. So thank you for coming. My name is Erica Mariko Olsen, and I currently work as a publishing producer at Humble Bundle. Why am I here? This is the slide just to tell you that I've been associated with different companies or IPs, so I have been in the industry for a little while, but this wasn't my first career. So this is what my resume looked like before joining the games industry. That's not to say that I didn't want to be in the games industry. I've been a gamer my entire life, but I didn't really have any role models or mentors growing up who encouraged me in that direction. So I really just had no idea it was even on the table. So my past resume, most recruiters and hiring managers would look at this and really see zero connection to the games industry. And yet I've now been in the industry for 8 years. So I'm going to super quickly take us backwards through my games career so that we can kind of explore where those intersect. So currently working as a publishing producer at Humble Games, and I also did the same thing for Stadia. This is primarily working with external teams on multiple projects. And before that, I worked at Riot Games as an in-house producer, focusing on internal teams and their overall work systems. And I moved through a couple of different roles at Riot. And I started my career in the games industry, full-time at least, in recruiting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how did I get here, because it wasn't 100% intentional, but I do think it happened because of these 4 things: networking and volunteering, timing and luck, identifying skills without perfect context, and convincing others. So networking and volunteering. After graduating college, I was volunteering at Sakura-Con and at Anime Expo. It's, not quite the video games industry, but it is adjacent. There's lots of anime lovers in the games industry. And the thing to note about networking is that it's really not just about meeting the right people. It's an opportunity for you to be building your social skills, hopefully making friendships that last beyond just the one time. You're building credibility in a space that you care about, especially with volunteer work, and you're making your skills and passions known, and you're creating an interesting bullet point on your resume. A lot of recruiters look at these things on my resume and they just want to know more about it because it's kind of unique. But a key concept here is to be willing to give before expecting to receive. And one little bonus I'd like to add about volunteering, because I do think it is the best form of networking. If you, for example, maybe you have student loan debt and you can't necessarily afford to attend the types of events that you want to, volunteering is a really great place to get in for free. All right. So now timing and luck. So we don't really get the opportunities. We don't get control over what opportunities are presented to us, but you have control over saying yes or no, and you can try to maximize the number of opportunities that come your way through that prerequisite networking. The reality is that a lot of jobs in the games industry need to be filled really fast. And so you want to be remembered so that people will think to reach out to you when the time comes. A lot of times there isn't really time to have a thorough interview process and consider a whole lot of candidates. Again, they're just trying to get somebody to do the job fast. And so because I had proven to be reliable and organized during my volunteer work, I was remembered and asked by another volunteer to help on BlazBlue Chronophantasma. All right, so here's where it starts to get a little bit harder. You want to be able to break down the things that you do into their most basic pieces. And then if there is another role in the industry that you're looking to transition to, I encourage you to talk to people in those roles and really break down what is it that they do. And you'll often find that there's a lot of similarities, and you'll be able to articulate them even though they were not necessarily in the same context. So just for an example here, here's some of the typical things that you might do in these two non-games industry roles. But how can we re-articulate them in a way that applies to being a producer? And so, as you can see, a lot of this stuff is just rewording it into a way that applies into our roles in the industry. And your previous experience may not be one-to-one with what you want to do next, but the combination of your previous experiences can, kind of merge into checking all of the boxes for the next thing. So again, it's not perfect context, obviously, because it's not from the games industry, but they are the same transferable skills. All right, so now the actual hard part is convincing others. There are a lot of people in the industry who look for that perfect context. They want you to have games industry experience in order to work in the games industry. And it, is kind of this catch-22 situation. There are people with a very fixed mindset and they're not going to be convinced, but there obviously are people who can be convinced. We have a whole panel of people who took different routes into the games industry. So just remember that you don't have to do it alone. You will find allies and advocates and mentors who are going to help you and are going to talk you through breaking down all of your core competencies and skills and applying them into the industry. So we're out there and we're willing to help you if you'll let us. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Osama.
Thank you, Erica. Well, hello, my name is Osama Dorias, and I'm the lead game designer at WB Games in Montreal. I'm a game design teacher at Dawson College and one of the 3 Habibis on the Habibis podcast. Here are some of the games that I've contributed to over the last 14 years in the industry. I'd like to start my story at the beginning. In 1979, a young boy was born in Iraq. Little did he know he was about to embark on a great adventure that spanned many continents, experiences, and careers. As most kids do, I loved making up games as a kid. And I do so on the playground with my friends and siblings, but it didn't stop there. I actually also loved designing card games and board games. One of my earliest memories is asking my father to bring home an empty pizza box. He was baffled, but he complied. And when I had that box, I created a board game inside of it. So the inside of the box was where the game was. And when you close the box, that was the container of the game. And I still find that incredibly clever to this day. As I got older, I moved on to making maps for video games like Duke Nukem, StarCraft, Heroes of Might and Magic, Unreal Tournaments. This is one of the maps I made in the back. This hobby persisted into my 20s, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In addition to making games and maps for games as a kid, I also loved Legos and building things. So naturally, I wanted to be an architect. That was my dream. I wanted to design gorgeous, elaborate spaces. This was my dream from a very young age, but right before applying to colleges, I kind of had a change of heart. And suddenly I felt directionless. I didn't know what to do with my life. And that's a really scary feeling, especially for a 17-year-old. I decided to major in political science because it was a study that interested me, even though I really didn't have any real desire to work in the field. And after university, I got a job as a shipping agent. I kind of had a love-hate relationship with it. I loved going on ships and meeting the captain and the crew from all over the world, but I hated doing the customs paperwork. I did learn a lot from my time as a shipping agent, though. I had to have impeccable work ethic and punctuality. Paperwork had to be ready on time. I couldn't be late or the ship would be delayed, and that could cost millions of dollars to the client. I learned to be organized and have impeccable attention to detail. One wrong number in the wrong field could cost a small fortune. I learned to respect process, even when I didn't like it. I learned to communicate and negotiate. But most importantly, I developed my emotional intelligence. When you work with so many people from all over the world with different customs and backgrounds, you quickly learn how to identify shared values and how to speak to those values. I eventually quit that job and I started freelancing as a graphic and web designer. I was self taught. I dabbled in it in my teens. I made a website for my dad's business at one point. And I'm a pretty fast learner, so it didn't take me long to line up some clients and get some work. I eventually learned Flash, and then I, of course, made Flash games. They were pretty awful. As a freelancer, I had to learn how to manage my own time and tasks, as well as manage client expectations. I was a team of one, so I had to be self motivated and resourceful. There was no one to give me answers or to bail me out if something went wrong. I also picked up some hard skills along the way. I learned how to script, which eventually helped me prototype. I learned how to use Photoshop, which helped me create convincing mock-ups and fakes. And most importantly, I learned how to iterate. I didn't have a choice. When you're working with customers, they're never happy with the first version of anything. I had to develop thick skin and learn not to get overly attached to what I made. That is one of the most valuable skills I have as a designer right now. At that point, I'd been making games my entire life, but I had never even considered a job in game dev. Everything changed when my friend Ahmed became a game designer. See, Ahmed also studied political science, and he was brown like me. And representation matters. Seeing him make it opened my eyes, and I knew I had found my calling. My entire life had prepared me for this moment, and Ahmed thus became my first mentor. And over the next 6 months, he guided me in creating a portfolio. I had plenty of things already to put in a portfolio. I mean, I'd been making things my entire life. So he helped me just parse the bad from the not so bad and make the good even better. I must have applied to over 100 different companies at that time, all over the world. And I initially didn't hear back from any of them. I eventually got one interview, and that, luckily for me, translated to a game designer job. And I've been a game designer ever since, leveraging all of the aforementioned skills in the process. And that's my story. Thank you. Take it away, Marina.
Thank you so much, Osama. Hello, everyone. I'm Marina Diaz. I'm 27 years old. I'm the CEO of my own company, Free of Caps Games. I'm also the lead designer of Dordogne with Je ne sais quoi Studios in France. And I have an undergrad in Italian and German and a master's degree in game design. And some of the awards that I won were Forbes 30 Under 30, Game Dev Heroes 2020, and I'm also part of AFTA Crew and other associations in the games industry. And this is what you normally see about me if you look for me on the internet. But now I want to tell you about what you don't see, but it's very important to know regarding career when you are considering starting in the games industry or even doing whatever you want to do. So first of all, I wanted to become a vet. When I was a kid, I had lots and lots of dreams, but the biggest was to become a vet. I really love animals and I still love them today. However, my biggest dream was changing quite often. Someday I wanted to be a vet, any other day I wanted to be a paleontologist, any other day I wanted to be a journalist, and so on. But then I also discovered the big truth that it's also one of the things that get me a bit far from the games industry, and is that I'm super bad at maths. So basically, when you're not good at maths, lots of things cut from your way. But then when life started happening, and it's when I was 5, my dad suffered a heart stroke, and then my mom needed to do everything by herself and taking care of my dad. You can see here my parents. And 2 years after that, my dad started suffering from depression, and a while later, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So basically, when these kind of things happen at home, and I was also an only child, basically it was very traumatic for me because I really didn't know what was happening at home, and that means that often there's no room for dreaming anymore because you need to grow very fast. And basically it was like a whole mess. I didn't understand what was happening at home. And that led me to teenager depression. And basically I used to stay up in the nights until the morning on my computer or not sleeping at all during days. I used to have great grades, but then I stopped going to school and missed a whole year that I needed to repeat, of course. Then I surrounded myself with bad people, and then things like tobacco and alcohol appeared in my life. And then as a result of that pretty bad environment, I ended in an abusive relationship that I can say I was lucky enough to survive. And then at the school, people were not supporting me very much either. And the teacher said to my parents that I was never going to achieve anything in my life. So you can see it's not like the best of the best. But then things started changing, even though I got lots of bad things that were happening around me. I found shelter in studying again. It was kind of like my way to escape from all those bad things. And during the rest of high school, I also changed school. I got great grades and honorific mentions. That was really nice. And then all of that gave me the power to leave that abusive relationship, even though in that case, I also think I was extremely lucky. But then, thanks to my grades in high school, I got a grant for going to uni, and I decided to study languages and literature, Italian and German specifically. You can see me here the day of my uni graduation. That was not super far ago, just in 2017. And then after uni, when I thought that I found my thing, I got lost again because I couldn't find a job. So basically, I started working in digital marketing, first as a trainee and then as a manager in the fashion industry. And I thought I liked it a lot at the beginning, but then I really felt I was not doing what I really wanted to do. That was basically to kind of help making change and helping people to improve their lives. So then one of these days, I was a bit sad. My mom suggested to me to go into games, as it was like really the only thing that I kept being constant about. And like I come from Spain, so when my mom said that to me, I was like, you are really crazy. That's impossible because our community in Spain is small and there are not much funding for game developers. So basically it was like a crazy idea, but I decided to follow what my mom said because a tiny thing remained in my heart with what she said. So I decided to apply to a master's degree at Brunel University, London, and I really didn't tell anyone about it, just one friend. And then in the meantime, I started making my own games with Bitsy and started going to local games events in Madrid after my work hours. So then one day in March in 2018, I got the letter from Brunel University in London telling me that I got accepted, and I couldn't believe it. But then the MA cost almost £8,000 and we couldn't afford it. I still remember when I called my dad telling him this amazing thing, and he was so angry at me. But he was not angry at me because he didn't want me to do it. He was angry because he didn't know how to help me in that moment. But then my parents asked to the bank if they could help them with a loan, and it was possible. So my parents did that for me, and I'm super grateful today. And then from my side, I also needed to ask for a loan in the UK so I could survive in London because it was impossible to get a job and at the same time study. So I got £10,000 that I finished paying this year. And then happened that I moved to the UK, to London, and during my MA in 2018, 2019, I was extremely lucky. I made amazing friends in London. My teachers at Brunel helped me a whole lot. And I was very lucky that I got an IGDA Velocity grant to attend GDC in San Francisco. And I did things like going to Pirate Jam in Thailand with my best friend to make games in about 14 days. After all these adventures, and once I finished my MA, I still needed a job. Many times in interviews I was turned down because I didn't have the experience in the studio, even though they liked my work. And then is when I started working as a lead designer with Je ne sais quoi, because at that moment they didn't have money, so I started helping them for free. But it was good for me because it was kind of an excuse for working with a studio anyway. And then I found a game set at charity in the UK that hired me as their operations coordinator. This experience helped me to stay in London and not going back to Spain. And then 2021 arrived, and basically in April 2021 I was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 Europe. That was like a big achievement because they basically highlighted my experience as an emotional game designer. That is something that I fight for every day in the games industry. And then I was very lucky that I could lead a project about identifying your own emotions and accepting them instead of dismissing them. And then I keep working with Dordogne today and dreaming again. And what I want to say with all of this, basically keep dreaming, and that dreams are also self-care. I really know that life can be pretty harsh and it's not easy, but there are sometimes some small actions that we can take from today to pursue our dreams and being a step closer to make them true. So for me, when I started in the games industry, and like going with my work in digital marketing at the same time, for me it was to take 20 minutes per day to make some games. Anything I could anything I could make in that time. Sometimes was a bit more, whatever it helps you. Then that you're important, you come first. I burned out myself several times in this industry, and I don't recommend it. It's really not worth, and you can do so much better change if you feel yourself good, and also that you can keep with example for others coming behind you. And then be kind to yourself and treat you with respect. Thank you so much. And now I give the word again to the amazing JC Lau.
Cool. Thanks, Marina. Hi, I'm Dr. JC Lau, and I'm a producer at Harebrained Schemes, and I also serve on the board of directors for Global Game Jam and the Seattle chapter of the IGDA. Now, in my time in games, I've been a Scrum Master, I've been a test engineer, I've been a project coordinator, I've worked in QA, I've written scripts, I've had a job translating American English into Australian and New Zealand English, and that's all a lot of stuff. But before I was a game developer, I was a college professor of moral and political philosophy, and then before that, I was a family lawyer. So in my journey into games, I've had to develop a lot of different skill sets. And what I'm going to talk about today is something that I learned on this journey, which is basically that when you have hard skills are important, but soft skills are importanter. And I'll talk about what I mean by this shortly. But first, here's the thing. Let's go back a little. I knew as a kid I wanted to go into games, and I just didn't know how to do it. Game schools weren't really a thing when I was young. And my degrees were in history, philosophy, political science, and law. And I developed a whole bunch of skills around just like being a lawyer and being an academic and argument and research. And I didn't know how to apply them to games or whether these skills were even relevant at all. So my question was basically, how do people enter the game industry from like what I was doing, a completely different area, and succeed? And now success is really important here because I also knew the games industry was relatively volatile and it has a high turnover. So for example, there's studies that have shown that the average career lifespan for a game developer is 5 years. And I wanted to get into games, but I wanted to make sure I could make that change into development in a way that was still sustainable. So I devised a strategy. As a lawyer and an academic, I knew how to do research. So I just started by doing a bunch of research about what games were and what roles there were in games. And I knew I wanted to be in the game making part and not so much publishing, for example, but without any actual expertise in art or design or programming, I ruled out those areas of games. The alternative was I went back to school for a couple more years, and at this point in my career, I really didn't want to do that. So I also looked at what skills I did have and how I could align those with any particular roles. I'll talk a little bit more about skills later, but based on what my skills were and what my interests were, I was looking at production. So once I had my research in order, I set about getting ready to make that jump into games. So I took a couple of computer science courses online, and I also did some stuff like playing with Game Maker and Unity. So at least I knew something about the technical side of making games. I went to some networking events, and I just went there and listened to people talk about games. And in doing this, I learned a lot about what the landscape of the industry was like, and I could also look for people who could be potential mentors or sponsors for me. And this one I have some thoughts about. So if money is a consideration, it's not a bad idea to save some. And I did this for practical purposes while I was still employed as a college professor. So in case I didn't get a job in games right away, I had something to fall back on. And after all that, I felt like I was ready to apply for jobs, and I worked on my resume and submitted it to a lot of different places. Now, in applying for game jobs, I relied heavily on my soft skills. And assuming that you have the technical or hard skills for a role, soft skills are really the things that will set you apart from other applicants. So soft skills are required for all jobs and roles, but they're usually a lot more difficult to cultivate than hard skills. And part of this is because they're a lot more nebulous, or the quality at which you can do them is much more subjective than hard skills. So for example, can you write an API or can you do a lighting pass are very different types of questions from can you empathetically support your team through a pandemic? Now, in my experience, both when I was applying for jobs and even now as someone that is involved in hiring other developers, people focus on soft skills a lot more than you might think. And what I'm going to do is talk about 3 skills that I found to be really effective here, and those are collaboration, communication, and having a growth mindset. So, firstly, collaboration. Collaboration is the ability to be a good team player. So, unless you plan to be a solo dev, collaboration is absolutely essential to having a functional team. You're going to come across a lot of different people with a lot of different personality types, and being able to navigate your interactions with them is a really vital skill to have. This is also especially important if you're working across teams or across functions. So, if you're an artist, but you can kind of work with an engineer and understand what they're talking about and so on. So, the better that you can work with different types of people, the more effective as a team member you'll be. So, secondly, is communication. Communication deals with questions about understanding and being understood. So, are you able to articulate your view clearly? Do people know what you mean when you say something? Communication is vital to making a game because it requires that people understand what you're saying so you can collaborate better and be aligned on your goals. Now, for me, communication also includes things like knowing when not to talk and being able to read social cues and also holding space for others to speak. Okay, and finally, the third one I'm going to talk about here is growth mindset. Now, this is the ability to understand how you like to learn and look inward at what you have learned and make plans for how you will continue to get better. Having a growth mindset also prevents you from stagnating on your hard skills because you will continue to learn as new hard skills develop or as new tech comes out. And it also helps develop emotional resilience. So if and when something goes wrong on your project, you'll know how to do it better next time. So you'll have other skills that will be useful in your journey through the industry. So make sure that you keep space for that and find out what works for you. So I've only listed 3 here, and this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, using a combination of my skills, I started my journey into games at Xbox. And after that, I went to Bungie to work on Destiny 2 and its DLCs. And then I moved to Harebrained Schemes for Battletech and its DLCs. So even within the industry, you'll be moving between studios and projects and roles, and it's important to keep those soft skills developed. In summary, prepare yourself for the games industry. Do your research and take stock of your skills. And once you have your hard skills at the level that you need for the roles you're applying to, focus on your soft skills. Regardless of what role you end up taking or what studio you go to or what project you're working on, you'll need your soft skills to work with other people. And finally, don't forget to keep developing your skills. One cool thing about the games industry is we are constantly evolving. Our tools will continue to improve and our products will continue to improve. So remember to keep improving yourself as well. All right, so now we'll go into our Q&A session where we have a couple of questions that we'll talk about in the panel. So firstly, let's talk about skills. So we've talked a lot about our skills and our previous experiences in our individual presentations. So how did you all try to leverage your previous experience during your job search in games?
I could go first. For that one, I did have a lot of smaller jobs, but the two main jobs or careers that I had before video games were freelance graphic and web design and shipping. And the type of skills I had from both of those were very different. From freelance graphic and web design, mostly, I actually had some hard skills that I was able to apply pretty much directly into game development. So I learned some scripting because you needed to do some scripting. And even though it wasn't in the same languages that we were using in video games, just having some kind of a background and understanding how that works allowed me to learn more proprietary editors and the scripting languages that went with them. And surprisingly, my Photoshop skills were actually really strong because I was a graphic designer, right? And that was a thing I was able to leverage, but a thing I had to actually scale back because game designers are not supposed to make their mock-ups look good and spend a lot of time on them. That's not the point. We're supposed to just make fakes or like something that's quick and dirty just to give an impression or an idea. And one of the funny stories that happened actually is that one of the games I worked on shipped with a mock-up of an options menu that I made as a mock-up because I polished it a little too much. And we put it as a placeholder into the game. And nobody noticed, including myself. We forgot about it. And only much later did someone say, hey, looks a little bit different than the other menus, but it was too late. The game released in launch. I won't tell you which game because I still, NDAs, I don't know when they expire, when I'm allowed to talk about it. But yeah, however, those tools, those editors that I learned, a lot of those skills were able to be leveraged directly. In terms of my shipping industry experience, a lot of that was just dealing with people. And that I was able to leverage specifically into the interview. Just talking to people, negotiating, and those are skills. And what I tell a lot of people is that interviewing is a skill like any other. Even if you're happy with your current job, it doesn't hurt once in a while just to say yes to an interview. If there's just even a small chance that you might say yes to the job, because you'll get better. Like you'll start to understand what the expectations are. You'll start to see your worth, but you're actually going to get better at interviewing. A lot of the interviews, you hear the same questions, and you'll be able to see patterns of thought. So I had a head start in that because a lot of the skills I had was meeting new captains almost on a weekly basis from all over the world. So I had to I was very good at making a good impression and understanding where they're coming from and learning, knowing what their values are and laughing at their jokes and all these little things that are subtle. I had a head start. I had a lot of experience doing that. That helped me in my career. It translated well into freelance and graphic web design. I was able to meet clients and relate with them really quickly. And it also helped me with my one interview that I had at the beginning of my career that I got lucky and I was able to land.
Cool. Yeah, so more about skills. Were there any skills that you feel like you should have had, but you didn't have when you moved into games? And if so, what would you suggest to people that are considering entering games to, with respect to developing those skills?
I can go with that one. So I think that for me was specifically that I had pretty clear that I wanted to be a game designer. Right now, I don't know if I want to be just a game designer and also a narrative designer. So as you can see, you don't need to choose one path at the beginning of your career and stick to that. You can do many things. But basically, I think that for me, it was that I was a bit lost with, how to do things, in terms of okay, I saw people that was pretty technical, but I really don't enjoy making lots of spreadsheets and stuff. So I felt I was not like a technical game designer. I felt that I wanted to be a game designer, but not a technical one. And I thought that maybe that's why it was not a place for me in the games industry. But then I realized that it's possible to find your voice in the games industry. Not everyone works in the same way. So that I was not less game designer because I didn't enjoy spreadsheets, but I could, I sometimes do enjoy spreadsheets, but it's not my favorite thing. And I realized then that it's possible to kind of work on your own way, and that to show others that you are efficient the same, and that you can do different new things just working on your way. Because if all of us we work in the same way, there is no innovation at all in the games industry, and everything will look the same. So it's actually like, I think my recommendation is that follow your heart and try to work on your own way with your own skills and contributing with your uniqueness, because probably there is no one else in the world that works like you do. So like, it's really good to kind of get inspired by other people in the games industry and our work colleagues every day, and even our friends. But it's also important that you look at what makes you unique, because probably there are lots of things. And I think that's also part of the kind of spiciness you can add to your career from your own self.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we all have very different backgrounds into games. And I know sometimes, like we've mentioned, not having a games background to go into games has been this weird vicious circle, but also is sometimes problematic if you have particular backgrounds that, don't seem to obviously fit into games. So for me, I know when I started applying to the games industry, and this was across a bunch of different roles, like, in QA or in marketing or in production, I got rejected from a bunch of places just because I was told I was overqualified due to having a PhD. And that also made me a flight risk. So studios were concerned I wouldn't want to stay at that particular workplace once. And I was just kind of using them as a foot in the door. So I was wondering, do any of you also have stories about, your backgrounds being challenging for entering games or moving through games?
Yeah, I can say something real fast about that. So when I entered the games industry at Riot Games, so I started in recruiting. And a big reason I was able to do that is that, recruiting isn't one of those roles where people are like, oh, you need a computer science degree and things like that. But when I eventually wanted to transition from recruiting to production and leading teams, I got a lot of pushback, and I really, really had to lean on finding mentors and advocates for myself, because, there are some people who are like, they just didn't see how what I was doing could possibly apply to leading a team of game devs. And so, yeah, it just falls back to those, there are people who have a fixed mindset, and they'll look at your background and completely judge you for that. But again, like Riot Games is also the same company where I found my mentors and I was able to transition into production. So they had both those people there, right? The fixed mindset people and the growth mindset people. But yeah, it has been held against me.
I could add something to that as well. It's a little, it's not 100% answering your question, but it's still something I think is pertinent and related. Working with people from all over the world as a shipping agent, basically it helped me develop thick skin, because people have different cultures and norms and backgrounds and values. And a lot of times they'll say things that are somewhat inappropriate when your first name is Osama, or you have an interesting background to them. This actually helped me develop thick skin. So at the beginning of the industry, the topic of microaggressions, which I didn't even know the word back then, was one where I was able to shrug off a lot of things directed at me. And that sounds like a good thing, but it's actually not a good thing. To a certain extent, there are some things that you shouldn't be tolerated in a workplace, and it took me a while before I understood that these skills that I had learned in the shipping industry were probably not a good thing, and that I could have leveraged them differently. I should have been able to be more vocal and whatnot. So it probably saved me, because at the beginning, when you're a junior, you probably should keep your head down because you don't have a lot of power or agency to be able to do much. But it's also something that was complicated later, because I had this unhealthy relationship with microaggressions that I had to unlearn and learn how to, stand up for myself and my values later on. So that's something to watch out for. This diplomacy can go both ways.
Well, we're glad you got through that, and now you're here.
Thank you.
Cool. So, yeah, speaking of interacting with different types of people, we've also touched on networking, and networking is a key skill that people develop in their job searches, especially in the games industry. So, yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me something about the role that networking and making contacts had for job searches.
Yeah, so for me, I 100% got into the industry through networking, right? And it wasn't on purpose or anything like that. It was just that I had done all of this volunteer work, and through doing that, people recognized, my abilities to be organized, reliable, etc. And so, I guess when you think about networking, it is less about rubbing shoulders and just trying to make the right connections. It's really about trying to establish actual relationships with people, because again, you want to be remembered. You never know when opportunities are going to pop up. I think that I had been volunteering for 2 years before an opportunity popped up. So, if I had gone into it thinking, 3 months after I meet somebody, I'm going to have a job, I would have been very disappointed.
I could add to that as well. So my network in the gaming industry before getting into games was exactly 4 people. I knew 4 people who worked in games, all of which I met before in different contexts, before they were in video games. Like Ahmed, who I mentioned in my presentation, we played field hockey together. That's how we met the first time we played. He played on my team. And I also 100% got into the game industry because of my network, because Ahmed helped me build a portfolio. And one of my friends, Alexi, who worked at Gameloft at the time, and that's where I had my first job in the industry, put in a good word for me. I don't know how far that went, but it's also the only place that gave me an interview, and it's the only place I had someone put in a good word for me. So I have very, very strong reasons to believe that it was because of his nudge that I got the interview, even though there's no direct proof for that. What I wanted to add is a good way to expand your network is to look for a mentor. And people often get this wrong. But oftentimes when they look for a mentor, the instinct is to overshoot. They're going to look for someone who's already, for example, an art director, a creative director, a game director. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying don't do this. But what I'm saying is those people will generally have much less time for you. And their experience in terms of when they got into the industry is removed by several years. So it's not as fresh. I was lucky because Ahmed was my mentor, as I even used that word in my presentation. He had only been a designer for a bit less than a year by the time that he showed me how to build a portfolio. But it was fresh in his mind. He knew what he had to do to go through and was necessary. Plus, nobody else was asking him to be a mentor, so he had a lot of time to dedicate to me. So a lot of times, shake it up, get different mentors from different places, but don't snub your nose at a junior who was just in the industry, who might have a lot of valuable information, who will be able to help you. It'll probably be much easier for you to get a hold of them, and that relationship will probably give you more.
Yeah, I think I want to just echo that and say that I've worked with some, more senior level people, and at some point they're so far removed from what you're going to be doing. I probably wouldn't ask an executive producer how to do Scrum because they've probably forgotten.
Yeah, I'll also add, given the pace at which this industry changes, someone that is in their first maybe like first 2-3 years, like that's probably the range where like they will have seen like what the work will be like, what the tools you'll be using will be like. And someone who's like, I'm a 25-year veteran, like that's great if you can have contact with those people and learn from them. But like the tools have changed so much and the methods and the culture has changed so much in that time. So just I think it's really important to be aware of what the current targets are and also, the trajectory that you're taking. Cool. All right. So one thing I also wanted to add to just the point about networking is for me, it was finding the correct insertion point. So I came into the industry in through a very weird angle because I had academic knowledge of for example, the philosophy of race and gender because I taught that. And that transferred into networking with a very particular intersection of people between people that cared about diversity and inclusion stuff and games. And then I went from that into D&I work in studios, and that turned into founding the Bungie Diversity Committee and also founding what we now call the Jedi Council at Harebrained Schemes, where Jedi stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So one thing to take from that, I think, was even though I had these skills for getting networking into this particular angle, I could use that to amplify things I cared about once I got into the industry and into a studio. And so networking isn't just here is a person, I'm using that person to get into get my foot in the door to get into the industry, but it's also about maintaining those contacts. And then once you get there, hold the door open for other people. Cool. Okay. Speaking more about networking, let's talk about LinkedIn because I know developers love to use LinkedIn. And for me, when I entered the industry, I had to basically make a profile from scratch because academics don't use LinkedIn. We use this thing that's called academia because creative names. Where you basically make a profile, and then instead of just all your workplaces, you list all the places that you've taught at and where you got your degrees, and you publish your papers on this website. And so from going in from academia into games, I had to make this whole profile from scratch because otherwise I had no online presence in any professional capacity. And after I did that, people could find me and see what I did and what I cared about. So I was just wondering about the impact that networking online or LinkedIn had on your job searches.
Yeah, for me, I didn't really use LinkedIn for networking at all, but I did. I was sort of like, one of those early adopters of whenever a new platform would appear. And I was like, oh, LinkedIn. And I put all of my volunteer experience on LinkedIn, and because volunteer experience counts. So yeah, I put all of that on LinkedIn. And then I also had like my one paid experience with BlazBlue Chrono Phantasma in the industry. And before joining the games industry, I was a teacher, so I like had all of that on there too. But somebody from Riot Games ended up finding me on LinkedIn initially, and so I owe a lot to just having visibility and discoverability on that website, because otherwise, I don't know, I may not be in the games industry. Maybe I'll be in the anime industry. Who knows? But yeah, I like highly recommend making yourself as discoverable as possible, because you never know who's looking for your skill sets.
Speaking specifically to that, actually, the first poke that I had for an interview was for a poker expert. And apparently one of the things that made my portfolio or CV stand out was because I had poker written in the interests. I used to play poker with my friends. So yeah, don't be afraid to become a human and be a person and to show that side of you, like the interesting things, the different things about you. Anything will help you stand out.
Cool. Yeah, it's important, I think, just as we go through games also, I know there's been this kind of cultural shift into seeing developers as human beings with these multifaceted like identities, and we do more than just make games. So yeah, I think that's really important, just to show really who you are. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about supplemental education. So I mentioned that I had done a like really short computer science course, and Marina, you went to school for games. So yeah, what kind of supplemental education or certifications do you think are useful or not useful for people who are trying to break into games?
So basically, it's true that I have a master's degree in game design, but even though it was a good thing, because like, I don't know, in my times, like 3 years ago, everyone was saying that if you didn't have a certificate that said that you were a game designer, no one was going to hire you. So I was scared of that, and that's how I thought I needed to apply to a master's degree. But the thing is that when I arrived to uni, I had ahead 2 years, almost 2 years of going to events in Spain, to games events, to networking with people, of making bitsy games in my free time. So once like I arrived to the masters, I actually had much more experience than what I thought. So like everything was very useful to kind of refresh knowledge, and like even, for example, getting skills on the production side, or even pitch decks was a thing that we saw in the master's degree. But I don't think that it was something that helped me like to discover new things. It just gave support to things that I already did my homework at home years before. So and then I wanted to talk about another important thing, is that I did a whole lot of courses that were from Coursera and those kind of things that are for free many times. And I did lots of them. Like I did courses from CalArts, I did courses from Brown University, like many of them in many things, and especially in graphic design and those things. In game design as well, I got a very good course from CalArts in Coursera actually before going to uni. And I think that that's also very important, because many times, as Erika said as well, we don't count kind of experience that we have with things that are kind of for free. But it's time you're taking into, like time you're putting from aside to learn new things. And that's important as well. The only difference between those things and going to school is that, honestly, that you pay, and that you maybe have like a physical space where you do that. But I think one of the good things with the pandemic this year has been that we could see that we can do lots of things, and we don't need sometimes those spaces, even though, of course, being with other people with the same interests helps a whole lot. But also, like, wanted to highlight the experience from disabled people, that with the pandemic, they were able to do many more things than before. So we should really count these kind of things better in job experiences. So yeah, uni is cool. If you could go, or if your parents can help you, is fine. Many countries is very difficult, like in the US and other countries is very difficult for many people. But I think it's not completely necessary today to get an official thing. So I would put more effort in things that we said already in this panel, like networking, like not only for get your foot on the door, but also to make friends, very good friends actually, and like keep being curious and open. That's the best thing, I think.
Yeah, from my point of view, to answer the same question, I agree with what Marina said wholeheartedly. I would say it also depends on the role that you have. Many of the companies that I worked in, they didn't hire junior programmers unless they had a degree, programmers specifically. But designers, it didn't really matter as long as they had a portfolio. And the most likely people to be hired as designers were people who are already in the company in another role, like, for example, QA or anything else. Because at that point, um, a lot of things that designers have to know, it's really hard to put in a portfolio. It's really hard to show that you know how to do it. So if you meet somebody and you work with them, even in a different capacity, you'll start to see if they have the soft skills or the the analysis skills or analytical skills or anything else similar to that they would need. So it's really hard to give an answer that just says this is what you need. But from game designers specifically, is if you have some experience with an editor, any editor, because most of the companies or many of the companies use proprietary tools, so they don't expect you to know already what they're using. But you have some experience they feel that you could leverage. Game editors like Unreal or Unity, either or, that's going to give you a plus. If you know how to use like Photoshop or something similar for mockups, if you know how to use Excel for formulas, and there's the one that I didn't know at all before getting into games, Visio for flow charts and things like that. That's a thing that took me by complete surprise. I didn't know that existed. I used to make my ugly flow charts in Photoshop myself, and it's not very easy to do. I didn't know that. Of course, it didn't make sense now, but you don't know what you don't know. Once I learned about how to, I used a free one called YEd a million years ago, which I would recommend if it's still around because it's free. It's not like Visio, but there's a lot of other tools like that because a lot of things are really hard to show unless you show them in relation to other things. So it's a very graphic way to show your designs. So if you're in a different role, it's a good idea to get that mentor in that role and ask them what tools that they're using and find something equivalent where you get the same experience as well.
Yeah, as like a producer or a project manager, again, like it's really hard to show your work and like show off a portfolio. And so when you have certifications in Scrum or PMP or whatever it is, it's just one of those things where it's to give people some level of confidence that you know how to do what you're doing and you've been educated on this kind of thing. I don't personally see value in the certifications. Like I have several agile certifications, and a lot of times I'm sitting in those classes, I'm like, yes, obviously talk to people and then you'll figure out the work system. But it's just one of those things that I feel like it's a good resume point, but practically they're not like necessarily super helpful. And so it also, unfortunately disadvantages people who can't afford to get those certifications. So the Agile Illuminati is going to be mad at me, but I think that, a lot of these classes are a waste of money or they overcharge. But yeah, it's just, if you can get those additional bullet points on your resume when you're trying to break into the industry, it's just, going to make it easier for you because, when you think about applying for jobs, you think about it as like, how risky am I as a hire? And so that's sort of the assessment that interviewers and hiring managers are trying to make. Like, can I trust that this person can do the job? And so just like every little thing you can get to make you look like less risky of a hire is a benefit.
Yeah. Well, if I could take it back to add one last quick thing. If your heart is set on studying game design in university, that's fine. No problems with that. Just the most important metric with that is ask them about their placement rates. A lot more designers graduate per year than there are junior positions that open up. And the schools that are most successful, they're the ones who find the jobs. And that's ultimately what you want to do at the end. If they don't share their placement rates, that's a bad sign. So just putting it there.
One thing I think I would also add to certification issues is I agree with Erica in terms of, at least from production, Scrum certification is highly, highly contested. And I know people, like some courses are up to like $2,000. And if you're new in the industry and you don't know what you really want to do, that's a lot of money to drop in, exploring a particular path. So if you do want a certification, there are cheaper alternatives you can look for. So Marina has suggested Coursera, and I actually did a Coursera program just in project management, which was half the price and still gave me that one line on my resume. So that's also fine. One other thing is it does demonstrate motivation for self-starting, which is a soft skill that people care about. Cool. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. So very quickly, one sentence, what advice would you give other people regarding moving into games?
Be good to people. People will remember it if you're good to people.
Yeah.
I would say try to model the behaviors that you want other people to also do.
I would say also, like, again, take care of yourself and rest.
And that's all we have time for. So thank you to our panelists, Erica, Osama, and Marina. And thank you for coming and listening to our panel. So here we have our handles on Twitter if you would like to follow us and continue the conversation. So thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.